All right. So we just finished talking about the fourth law, make it satisfying, unsatisfying. So now we've gone through all four laws of atomic habits. So these last few chapters are just kind of closing out. James Clear has a few more thoughts. The subsequent chapter, which is 18, he's talking about the truth about talent and how important is talent in terms of overall success and building habits. Um, at the start of this chapter, he kind of talks a little bit about Michael Phelps as a swimmer, and then this one runner that I did not recognize. And it has a pretty honest discussion about genetics and the talent that you're born with. That does still play a really big part in your life. Michael Phelps was lucky to have a really large wingspan. His torso was really tall, but he had really small legs, and that is perfect for a swimmer. And then on the flip side, you have this runner who had really long legs and a really short torso, which was great for running. So he kind of had this hypothetical where if you switch them and they both try just as hard as possible to be Olympians in being Michael Phelps being a runner and this other guy being a swimmer, they probably wouldn't, unfortunately, just because that's how their bodies were designed to be. So this chapter kind of set a standard like make sure you understand where your talents lie, right? And be aware of those when you are building these habits, because it can be such a detriment if you get into something you're not very good at, or it can be a strength if you find something that you're naturally inclined to do. So, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I like that part that your genes do not determine your destiny. They determine your areas of opportunity. Um, and genes can predispose, but they don't predetermine. So just because, Phelps was had the genes that he had, didn't mean he was going to be an Olympic swimmer. But it did narrow his kind of opportunities down, like maybe from 1,000 different jobs to like few jobs. Like he probably couldn't be a jockey for a horse race or a gymnast. Um, but then like one of his strengths is that he like identified that early and said, okay, I'm not going to waste my time being a jockey. I'm not going to waste my time uh, doing gymnast stuff. I'm going to like spend my time doing like what I'm just naturally good at. Um, so that was a helpful way. It seems like some people write off genes as being like totally determinative and like, oh, I don't have the genes for that. It's not even worth like trying something like that. Or the reason why I'm not successful in life is because of my genetics or my environment. And so not blaming it 100% on those things, but
Yeah.
being aware that your genes limit your opportunities in life. And if you want to be truly successful, is to identify what you're like genetically gifted at, and then you got to put in all the time and the work to improve at that, and the luck as well. I mean, it's not
Totally.
just those things.
That's a really good outlook on avoiding using it as an excuse. I like that a lot too. You see that a lot. We've talked about weight loss is kind of a common. That's a one that you've said before. It's really easy to understand, but it's really hard to do. I'm sure a lot in your profession you hear people say stuff like, "Well, I'm big boned," or "I'm genetically predisposition to be 300 pounds." And while there is maybe a little bit of truth to that, I mean, from my understanding, with the right amount of caloric intake at a deficit, anyone is able to be a healthy weight. So it's yeah, just remembering don't use stuff like that as an excuse. That's good.
And with
Um,
weight loss example, I mean, yeah, maybe you crave sugary foods. Like your genes just make it so you crave sugary foods. Um, and so then like it doesn't mean you can't lose weight. It just means like maybe your weight loss technique is a little bit different than somebody else's who doesn't necessarily crave those foods. They just eat a lot of processed foods because they're always working. Maybe that person then goes to a Mediterranean diet, and the person who's really craving sugary foods does like time restricted feeding. So I think
yeah,
like that's an example of how your genes, and using the word genes is very loose because it's more than just genes. It's your epigenome which changes, it's your microbiome, but I think that's getting too complicated. Yeah, yeah. That's the point, I think, is that it limits your opportunities.
yeah, absolutely. Speaking of this, there's it's always a common discussion. It's like nature versus nurture. Which one plays a more important part? And this guy talks about the situation with these babies, right? And there's like a loud sound that's being played, and some babies turn to look at the sound and the others turn to look away. And he was claiming that a study that was being done, that the babies that turned to look at the loud sound were more predispositioned to be extroverts and more social humans. I thought that was really interesting. And, while I think I believe him, I always had the notion that something that predicted your social ability, or something that determined your social ability, was purely nurture. And there was almost no nature involved in that at all. So that was news to me, that the way you socialize, and if you're an extrovert or introvert, can also be based off of your nature.
Yeah, I think part of the issue is it's like really difficult to like quantify how introverted or extroverted you are as an infant. But there are really interesting studies looking at kind of how your personality doesn't really change too much throughout your entire life. You are kind of the same person for a lot of different aspects. And introverted versus extroverted is definitely one of those kind of key markers.
Yeah.
And he brings up this point. He brings up a little bit this chapter and a little bit the next chapter, about doing things that are easy enough in order to be successful, and how that drives kind of moving forward. And then in the next chapter, doing things that are not too easy, but are like equal parts challenging, and that brings you into flow. So I guess since he's starting to talk about it in this chapter, I'll just bring it up. But this makes a ton of sense to me, and I totally agree with it. I've kind of learned this as the third rule, whereas like to be successful and to grow at something, you need to be successful like a third of the times that you do it and feel really confident after it. A third of the time you need to feel like you failed and be like, wow, I did a terrible job. That was way too difficult for me. And the other third of the time, it just needs to be like in the middle. Like I don't feel like that was super easy. I also don't feel like it was super hard. It was just kind of in the middle. And if you're able to kind of maintain those thirds, then you're in a right spot where you're able to grow and progress, but not get beat, and it's sustainable where you're not like giving up on something. If it's too much of oh, that was really easy, then you're never going to progress and grow. If it's too much of the, wow, that was really difficult, then you're not going to keep doing it over and over again. So I really, really like that point of kind of how to titrate the difficulty of a task based on how much you're in kind of a successful mindset versus a failure mindset, and in the middle. Um, and I feel like in here he only talks about the successful and the failure. He doesn't really talk about that middle. So I think he
Yeah.
kind of says that like 50% of the time you should be succeeding, 50% of the time you should be failing. I like this third rule because I think there's a lot of times when I'm at the gym or I'm surfing or there's some kind of skill I'm trying to improve at, and I don't
That's,
feel like it
yes.
necessarily was like incrementally that much better or incrementally that much worse. And so I think there is time for it to just kind of be in the middle. But the point being, you want to be in the balance.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that's something so many people struggle with. It's a lot of people are a disposition to, when they start something, making it as difficult as possible to try and progress as quickly as possible, right? Then you have this other side of the group that tries to make something as approachable and easy as possible to try and make it sustainable. And while it's both good intentions, I think if that one third rule is not followed very well, you either become really disheartened or you become really bored, and it doesn't sustain. So I love that point, and it's something I think a lot of people are not aware of. And I try to be, but it's easy to forget about that when you're in the moment and you have 10 successes in a row, and you're like, damn, okay, I'm kind of the shit. This is pretty easy, and you're not really aware that no, you should be failing as well if you want to continuously grow. So that's, yeah, absolutely great point. A little personal story actually on that note is back in college, me and my roommates got super into Super Smash Bros. Melee. I know you and me played the N64 version a lot. But yeah, we played Melee a shit ton. And there was this one buddy of ours who was also going to ASU, and he would come by, and he was like top 20 in Arizona. This guy was way better than us. And so I wanted to play with this guy a lot, and I played with him consistently. And I enjoyed playing with him. We play like 6 hours a day, way too much. So I found as I played with him more, and I got, a little bit better and closer to his skill and kind of separated myself from my friends, they ended up not wanting to play with me as much. And so they would be playing with each other where it'd be a close match, right? Sometimes they'd win, sometimes they'd lose, and they wouldn't find it as enjoyable to play with me. So in the process of playing with this new individual, like these roommates that I had didn't want to keep this up anymore because it wasn't enjoyable at that point. So that was kind of what my mind directly went to when thinking about this. So
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to the last chapter, sometimes you need like an external force, like an accountability partner to really kind of show you that you're too stagnant, and that there is a whole nother skill level to improve, and that you're really not doing the third of failing very much. Like maybe you're down to an eighth or a tenth of failing, and really kind of drive you up to a new potential. I've kind of had that with surfing, where I was only surfing by myself, and I had these barriers in my mind of things that I couldn't do, and then I started surfing with someone who was much better than me, and it made me realize I got a lot better in a short period of time because that person like really pushed me to go out of my comfort zone, and I failed a lot, and it kind of reoriented to me that I and maybe not pushing it as hard as I could have, to get better at these skills.
absolutely. Which, and I mean, you're a good example because I see you as someone highly motivated and really does push yourself. So that's, I think, a good use case of, if you, Taylor Martin, had a hard time getting to that point without an accountability partner, it's almost like an accountability partner is always going to push you harder than you can yourself. So definitely.
Yeah, 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 totally. What we think in our mind is like the truth isn't always the truth. And yeah, sometimes you need an external force to show you that.
Absolutely. Real quickly, my last kind of piece on this chapter was he's talking about this comic sketch artist, or like he drew comedy pieces for newspaper, Scott Adams. He had a pretty interesting point where he was like, I was pretty funny, but I was certainly not like the funniest person around, and I don't think I was funny enough to be a comedian. And I was a good at drawing, but I certainly wasn't good enough to be like a full-time artist. So I was able to kind of look at these two skill sets that I was okay at or pretty good at, and then found this avenue, this niche where I could combine them. And now I'm drawing, little comedy sketches, and I become highly successful in that because I've specialized much more into this specific area. For me professionally, I'm trying to do that with kind of my understanding of CRM software like HubSpot. I'm pretty good at it, but there are certainly many people better than me. And then my kind of understanding of marketing and advertising strategy. I think I'm pretty good at that. There are certainly many people better than me. But when I combine those two and I can, service you with your software needs on HubSpot while also offering strategy on your customer journey plan and your emails, I think that's where I provide a lot of value is when I get into that kind of niche.
Yeah, yeah, I love this point too. When you can't win by being better, you can win by being different. Um, yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. I think I brought this up earlier, but I had a mentor in undergrad, a research mentor, who like told me the way to be successful in research is to be talented and really lucky. And you, Taylor, are not talented and you're not really lucky. So you will not be successful at doing this kind of broad research. The way to get to success is to find something so niche that there's way less competition, and then that you are the one like, really making strides in that field. And that like has been like an impactful lesson that I think I've like carried on my entire life. That's like my medical specialty is really niche. My
Yeah.
subspecialty plus my medical specialty is super niche. And the more niche I get, there's less opportunities. It narrows the opportunities, but those opportunities like are really impactful, and there's not much competition for them because there's not many people that are trained in my way. So yeah,
I love that.
I totally agree with this.
Nice. Sounds like a pretty solid guy, that undergrad mentor. Dang. I
He
like
was
that.
a great mentor.
Nice. It's good advice for sure. Hell
Kind
yeah.
of what I got from that chapter. Nothing else
Yeah.
really stood out too much.
Yep. Same here. So we can go ahead and move on
This
to
next chapter is about this kind of rule of thirds. They call it this Goldilocks rule, but it's really being titrating a difficulty of something to not be too difficult, not be too easy. I feel like I don't know. I kind of said all I wanted to about that, but yeah, add anything else you want.
Yeah, just really kind of one small piece, a quote he had, which I don't know if I totally agree with. He has a quote here, which basically he's talking about like boredom and how what separates a lot of these really successful weightlifters was them just kind of falling in love with boredom, was how he put it in quotations. Like you have to fall in love with boredom. I guess I kind of challenge that a little bit. At least me personally, I'm the type of person where a habit I build, I mean, it has to be satisfying, kind of like the fourth law. Like there has to be some enjoyment out of it. I don't know if I totally agree with the concept of you have to fall in love with the boredom. I think of it more as take that boredom and find a way to make it somewhat enjoyable, which is I think what he's kind of preaching in the fourth law. Fourth law. So I don't know. I was a little conflicted about that. You though, going through all medical school, there were many hours and weeks and months where you were probably bored out of your mind. And I'm not sure if there was any way to make it enjoyable. So I'm interested in kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any pushback when I was reading that. That made a lot of sense to me. That yeah, you do have to. Yeah, the people who are successful are the ones who are okay with the boredom. I guess I didn't pick up that he was saying to be in love with boredom, but just to be okay with it and to be able to do something consistently, and not need to get amped up. I 100% agree with that. I mean, when I go to the gym, I'm not motivated to go to the gym. It's not like I want to go to the gym or I'm like, oh yeah, I'm freaking stoked. I like got this song, I got this pre-workout. I don't use any of that. I mean, I just go and do it because I know I have to do it. It's just a rule that I follow. It has nothing to do with motivation. It has nothing to do with interest or excitement. It's just this is what I'm doing today. This is what I do every day. I'm gonna go and do this today. Um,
Mhm.
so that's kind of what I got out of it. Yeah, it made a lot of sense to me.
Nice. Yeah, I respect
I
that.
I feel like one point that I missed in this entire book is that, or no, never mind. My brain's kind of scattered.
Dude. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that level of discipline for sure. Cause I'm getting more disciplined, I think, in my life, but the gym's a great example. You were talking about like, I don't need to listen to my music and don't need to be motivated. It's just what I do for the day. I am still in the position where I'm certainly motivated and I'm looking forward to listening to my music on the car ride there. So there is certainly a level of enjoyment that I have with it. And maybe based off this, it is less sustainable than yours. But for me, it works to have that type of motivation mixed in with the discipline for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think what he's saying is that this won't work in the long run. You cannot be motivated every single day. You can't be motivated to go to the gym on the 100th day or the 1000th day. It's a human law. It's just you will get bored eventually. So I think that's good for initiating habits, but I think kind of to keep something sustainable is that you just have to be okay with the boredom. And I guess what I was thinking about before, I feel like the one thing he's missing in this book, and I feel like it's one of the most impactful things I've used for habit creation is like just to set a rule and to make it seem like you cannot break that rule no matter what. And then you don't even have to think about it. Like I will not lie ever. I'm never going to lie. And so you have this rule and then you just live by it. And then you don't need to be motivated to do it. You don't need to think through logic and like, should I tell the truth today or not? Like, this is the rule. And that's what you do every single day, no matter what. And the same thing
Yeah.
with like exercise or going to bed early or doing something nice for your girlfriend or all these different things. I feel like to me, the most impactful thing I've done is just to like say, this is a rule and I'm going to do it no matter what. And I feel like that's how I've built a lot of the habits. So it's kind of disappointed not to really see that anywhere in here.
Mhm.
Um, I guess he's kind of touching on it on this aspect. Um, but yeah,
I I mean, I like that a lot. I think that way because I mean, you basically taken, let's say, line for example. You've made a decision once, so you don't have to make all these micro decisions for the rest of your life. Um, I love that. I think it definitely is really strong willed for sure. Um, I've also, I mean, there've been points where I guess, tried to set rules and I'm like, I can't break it, but I still end up breaking it, unfortunately, because in my head, I at the end of the day, there's not like a gun to my head when I'm telling myself, well, it's a rule. I have to wake up at 8 a.m. It's just a rule. I do personally have a hard time just following that. That's, lack of discipline, a lack of willpower, right? So I think it just depends on the person. And, you can slowly get to that point where you're more disciplined and you can start setting rules that you follow. Um, but maybe for the beginning, for someone who's just learning good habit formation, that can be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, it makes
So,
sense.
yeah. Cool. So I guess just to kind of wrap this book up, because was that it? The last chapter?
That's
Oh
it.
no,
Oh, no, there's one more.
yeah, my bad. I apologize. So now he's talking. The last chapter is kind of the downsides of good habits, or maybe kind of the side effects of good habits that you need to be aware of. Um, One quote that I liked is, when you do it good enough on autopilot, you stop thinking about how you can do it better. And this is also kind of in line with, a lot of these successes where you don't a lot of the time see a need to improve. You're successful consistently. And I think this ties into your third law you broke down perfectly. When you are failing a third of the time, I think it's almost impossible to be on autopilot, right? Because you're very aware of these failures, and a third of the time you're not really succeeding. So being on autopilot is uh, not possible. So when you are succeeding all the time, you get into this autopilot state, and you're not optimizing yourself. And I think that holds true for a lot of people and a lot of habits.
Yeah, that was a good point, good reminder. Kind of constantly be evaluating kind of the difficult things.
Mhm. A little bit too. He talks a little bit about the Lakers. This analytics that they had, I was kind of interested. I mean, you've played basketball quite a bit. The way they tracked it, I thought was interesting. It was career best effort, and it was kind of interesting. Let's say Magic Johnson gets 10 turnovers in a game and 20 points. It was like 1 point is the same good as one turnover is a negative, which I thought was interesting because a turnover is like way worse than 1 point. A turnover is way worse than one rebound. So I obviously understand the general concept of it. I just didn't know if I completely agreed with the analytics. Like someone who, like a Dennis Rodman type player who's getting a lot of rebounds, his type of value is going to be harder to track than a pure scorer like Michael Jordan with these type of analytics.
Yeah, I think that's just categorical bias. It's hard to develop index scores when there's something so
Mhm.
complicated.
Yeah.
But I like that example. I thought it was pretty interesting. Um, another thing he talks about is how mastery is breaking things down into steps. And so I think he's like, at the start of a habit, like there's all these beginner gains. Like if you start exercising, like you don't really need to worry about like which muscles to work out. Like you're gonna gain strength and muscle mass just because your body's naive to it. But then eventually, like you do need to kind of specify the exact skills that you want to get better at. Mastery is the process of narrowing your focus to a tiny element of success, repeating it until you have internalized the skill, and then using this new habit as the foundation to advance the next frontier of your development. So like I want to get my squat higher. So like what are the elements involved in a squat? Well, there's like a little bit of a hip hinge involvement. So I'm gonna start doing a lot more deadlifts. Like, okay, like I am getting the deadlifts, but like maybe my posterior chain isn't quite strong enough. So I'm gonna strengthen my posterior chain. Well, that's like too broad. So I'm gonna focus on like just my hamstrings. That maybe is a little too broad. I'm gonna focus it on just like a straight-legged hamstring exercise. So I really love this idea, and it reminded me of like one of my favorite drawings, um, Toro by Picasso. You see this?
Yes,
So he
absolutely.
starts with this really complicated bowl, and then over the course of these graphite drawings, going like up and then around, it's kind of in a weird format here, like this. But essentially, he starts really complicated, and each drawing he breaks it down into a simpler and simpler thing. So this bottom one on the bottom left is I want to get a stronger squat, and then this one's like need to do a little more hip hinging, and then this one's like posterior chain. Anyway, so where you break it down to its absolute most simplistic understanding thing, focusing on that one thing, and then building it back up all the way. This is exactly how we think about like problems in medicine. Like, well, somebody looks sick is kind of what this step is. Taking it all the way down to this step, which is like what labs, like is there white blood cell count high? Like you find out the exact problem and then kind of work your way back up to the full context. So I really like this concept that he brought up. Makes a ton of sense for mastering things. Again, not something you'd worry about kind of at the start of the process, not even something you worry about kind of when you're an intermediate. But once you've been doing something for many, many years and you're not seeing progression, specifying it down to the absolute most simplistic value and working on those things.
Absolutely. I love that visualization of that picture. I thought it, yeah, marketing as well. Like, overall, we need more customers. But dive down into, okay, why specifically, how can we get those customers? And, you get it narrower and narrower and narrower. And the more niche you get, a lot of the times, the better the results. So, yeah, that's an amazing point for sure. Let's see. Oh, one quote, I liked I have personally felt like this. I know a lot of people in my life too. The more sacred an idea is to us, the more deeply it is tied to our identity, the more strongly we will defend it against criticism. Um, I've seen this, professionally where something worked really well for an old CMO, this certain type of advertising strategy, where it's this like hot looking young interviewer interviewing a football player about a certain product. So in their head, this is a brilliant advertising strategy. So now they enter a sector that is tax services, and they think it can translate, right? When at the end of the day, business owners, when they're looking at a Facebook ad about tax services, they want to see someone who looks like, he's 90 years old and he did taxes for Shakespeare. That's what's going to convert. But these ideas are ingrained in his head that this worked for him previously. It's something he can transfer over, even though it's a completely different industry. I also have kind of held on to beliefs and opinions personally that should have been changed for a while, but maybe they worked for a little bit, and so they get more and more embedded into my skull. So I thought that was a pretty interesting piece for him to finish on.
Yeah, that was a great point. Yeah, I think so many of our ideas and beliefs we like hold on to as like part of our identity. Like this is who I am. Like I um yeah, am somebody who does this certain thing in this certain way. And that's always worked and it always will continue to work in the future. And then when those things inevitably change or you're unable to do those things, then you've lost part of your identity. Then you're completely lost. And so thinking of those things is just kind of like passing waves that come and go. Like I think we may have talked about this another time, but like if you're trying to meditate, you just see the thoughts, the ideas come and pass, and they are not who you are. They're not your
Yeah.
ego. They're not your identity. Yeah, they're just something that comes and passes. And I might think one thing today, and then tomorrow I might think something completely else.
Yep. That's totally
And
okay.
we'll be fine. That's not like
Yeah.
being a flip flop person. That's just like updating my beliefs based on like the new data that I see. So yeah, not yeah, this made a ton of sense to me. And kind of reiterate something I guess I've been thinking about a lot lately. So yeah, that was a helpful reminder.
Yeah. I really like your point on how if you change your opinion day to day, I mean that's a sign of open-mindedness, not indecisiveness, right? A lot of those I think sometimes get confused. They're two very, very different things. So yeah, absolutely. It helps too. I think we're younger and getting to talk about this. I think just with age comes this more concrete opinion of the world. Um, so I really do appreciate my grandpa is 87-year-old man, and he certainly has beliefs he's very hard set on. But there have been beliefs he's hard set on, and he'll read something that is a differing opinion or a different data, and he'll have a conversation with me, and he is willing to change his opinion. So that's been cool to see for someone that could be so entrenched in their beliefs.
Yeah, yeah, sure. He's a great example.
Mhm. Nice, man. Well, chapter 20 was the last one of the book. So Anything else you had for 20, or do you want to kind of wrap up with your thoughts?
No, I think just kind of wrapping it up. I mean, I think if there was one single high yield thing, it would be this graph, which is kind of breaking it into the four laws of habit creation, and then different things you can do in each of these laws to make it easier to form the good habit. Um, I like this table a lot. I will be referring back to it and thinking about it. These individual laws, some of them apply to me, some of them I don't think would be that impactful for me. But in each of these larger laws, a few of these kind of sub things apply to me in each one. So there's definitely something I could get. There's definitely stuff I learned from this book. Um, I think it was a little basic. A lot of these things I'm already doing now. And so it was nice to have something that articulated kind of things I've been thinking about or kind of been doing intuitively. I feel like there wasn't a ton that was like practice changing information. Like there wasn't a ton that I think like apply to my life or is new. I think a book like this would be really helpful for somebody like in high school or college as they're starting to think about habits and how they can impact their opportunities in life. And then maybe early enough that they have not developed those habits yet. So I think for someone in that age group, I would definitely recommend this book. Um,
I agree.
Outside of that, I don't know if I would particularly recommend this. This is the first book I've ever read about habits, but I
Mhm.
suspect there's a lot of books about habits and a lot of books written by people who um, are more successful and or have more credentials than this author. I didn't love that about this author. He doesn't seem like an expert in any way. He just seems like a writer. Um, so I think, yeah, if the topic was going to be habits, I would maybe look for another book. But I'm glad I read it. I don't regret reading it. Obviously, we finished the book, so it must have been good enough to finish. Um, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts. It was an easy read. It could have been a really quick read. I mean, you could have breezed through this in a few days if you really wanted to. So it definitely wasn't hard or arduous or anything.
Totally. I think that's pretty spot on. Yeah, I had it at like 6.5 out of 10. Some of the pros, I really like the visualizations. I was not expecting that going into this book. I think, and I appreciate you, Taylor, for showing those throughout this video. I think that's really cool for people to be able to see and follow along. I know it helped me. Um, I agree. It was, yeah, pretty basic, palatable, I guess is a nicer way to put it. I think that's maybe one of the reasons it did become so popular, like New York Times bestseller. It was almost like proving itself in the sense of here's a book that is relatively short. The language is pretty simple. So if you want to create this habit of building good habits, this is a book that makes it pretty easy, you know, and it is kind of a simplistic way to do it. But yeah, it was relatively short. There were definitely points, to be honest, where I got pretty bored in it. Um, I don't know if, all books about habits are going to be the most enticing thing ever, but yeah, it did seem some parts were a little bit boring and it was like pretty basic, like, shit that feels good, you're going to want to keep doing. And you talk about that for 2 pages. It's like, yeah, I think every human understands that. Um, but, there are a lot of other parts like, the importance of accountability partners and the Goldilocks rule, kind of that 1/3 rule that I thought were pretty interesting. And I think I could definitely get some good stuff out of this for my life. So, yeah.
One other thing I'd like to add is just that, going into this, I was wanting to use it to stop biting my fingernails, so stop a bad habit, and I've I've not made any progress on that, unfortunately. I regret to admit. I feel like this book really focused, not at all to blame it on this book, but the fault is solely on my own. But I was hoping that I could get stuff out of this book that could apply to that situation. And
Yeah.
this book, I would say, is kind of marketed as being both about good habits and bad habits as well. I would say it's like 80 or 90% about building good habits and like the minority is about avoiding the bad habits. So I would have liked a little more info on how to help with the bad habits. Um, Additionally, the stuff about the bad habits didn't like apply to my specific situation with the biting the fingernails. I'm sure it applies to a lot of bad habits and probably a lot of biting of the fingernails. But just my specific situation, it didn't really apply to. So I was a little
Totally.
disappointed in that.
I mean, I
But
remember to your point, especially like it was the cue aspect of it. It's like, for any bad habits, just like make it harder like to avoid. So it'd be like, don't have really a lot of junk food in your fridge. Unfortunately, you can't cut your hand off, right? They're always gonna fucking be right here. So yeah, that wasn't some aspects of it. I agree weren't always applicable.
yeah, overall pretty good. I think a 6.5 is a pretty good ranking.
Nice.
All right, well that was fun. I feel like we learned a lot. I guess we'll be doing the next book. The next book will just be one discussion, and we're discussing a very short book by Sam Harris about lying. So we'll cover that one, and then after that, we'll dive into another book.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Well, thanks for
Thank you very
joining
much.
us.
Yep. Peace out.